Imagine, if you will, a business that operates on a completely counterintuitive, almost bizarre premise.
Okay, I'm listening.
So I want you to picture a company that intentionally spends more money preparing its product for sale than it actually makes when it finally sells that product.
Right.
Like, let's say you run a lemonade stand, but you decide to spend, I don't know, $10 handcrafting a bespoke glass cup.
A very fancy lemonade stand.
Exactly. And then you drop 50 cents paying a surveyor to map out the absolute best spot on the sidewalk, and maybe $2 paying an environmental consultant to ensure you aren't, spilling sugar on any endangered ants or something.
Exactly right.
And then after all that, you sell the lemonade for $1.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a fast track to bankruptcy. You'd be out of business in a day.
Right. Now, imagine that this business isn't some plucky startup that lost its way. It is the United States government.
Yeah.
And the product we are talking about isn't lemonade or consumer electronics. It's millions upon millions of trees.
Yeah, when you lay the economic reality out like that, it sounds completely absurd.
It really does.
You'd think, an auditor would shut the whole operation down by Tuesday. But it's not a glitch in a ledger somewhere.
Yeah.
This is the structural reality of how a massive portion of our public lands are managed.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking at a stack of sources detailing what is known as the below-cost timber sale.
Right, which is a program run by the United States Forest Service.
Exactly. And our mission today is to really pull this apart. We are going to unpack exactly how this massive federal program operates, why it routinely loses money by design, basically, and how, almost accidentally, it has resulted in the creation of one of the largest, most sprawling road networks on the entire planet.
And we really, we need to linger on the sheer jaw-dropping scale of that physical legacy for a second.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we are not just talking about a quirk of government accounting here or some misplaced paperwork in Washington. We are talking about a physical footprint.
Yeah.
A staggering 370,000-mile road system crisscrossing our public lands.
Let me just pause on that number. 370,000 miles.
It's hard to even picture.
It is. I mean, if you're listening to this on your commute, think about how long it takes you to drive 10 miles. 370,000 miles is enough road to circle the Earth almost 15 times.
It is a literal empire of gravel, dirt, and culverts. And it was built primarily for one historic purpose, which is to extract timber.
Right.
To put that in perspective, the U.S. interstate highway system, the massive concrete arteries connecting every major city in the country, that's less than 50,000 miles long.
Wow. So the Forest Service manages a road network more than 7 times that size.
Exactly. And it's largely out of sight of the average American.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because when you throw around phrases like the government loses money on purpose and an empire of gravel, people immediately start taking sides.
Oh, for sure.
If you have a background in corporate finance, your head is probably exploding right now. You're likely screaming, just close the money-losing branches. But we are dealing with federal land, which means we are dealing with federal law.
Right, and that requires us to be scrupulously fair as we navigate these sources today.
Definitely.
On one side, you have fiscal watchdogs and environmental groups looking at the cold, hard cash.
Yeah, just the ledger.
Right, and they are calling this a massive, unjustifiable taxpayer subsidy to private logging companies.
Which, looking at the numbers, makes sense.
But then on the other side, you have the Forest Service.
Yeah.
And they argue, quite correctly actually, based on their governing statutes, that they are legally mandated to look far beyond pure cash profits.
Because they aren't corporation.
Exactly. They are required to provide unpriced public benefits, things like recreation access, wildfire fuel reduction, and, rural economic stability.
It's a classic clash of metrics.
Very much so.
The watchdogs are reading a spreadsheet, and the agency is reading a congressional mandate. So we are going to look closely at both sides of this ledger. Because to truly understand who pays and who profits from public timber, you have to understand the physical mechanics.
All right. You have to understand who builds the roads.
Yes. We can't argue about the billions of dollars or the accounting methods until we understand what actually happens on the ground.
Exactly. Like, how does a public tree legally and physically move from a mountain slope into a private sawmill?
That's exactly where I want to start. Let's walk the listener through a single timber sale, step by step.
Okay, let's do it.
Because looking at the sources, this financial loss isn't some sudden, shocking scandal where someone ran off with a briefcase of cash in the middle of the night.
No, not at all.
It is a built-in, slow-motion administrative structure, It takes
I
years.
mean, years is an understatement. Sometimes it takes a decade.
Wow, a decade just to sell some trees.
Yeah, a federal timber sale is a massive administrative marathon. And it starts long before anyone even thinks about bringing a chainsaw into the woods.
So what's step one?
First, the Forest Service has to locate a specific stand of timber that meets their broader management goals.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, maybe the trees are getting too dense and posing a fire risk. Or maybe they want to clear an area to encourage the growth of a different tree species.
So they identify a spot on a map. What happens next? I assume they don't just, like, post an ad online, right?
No. They have to figure out exactly what they are selling, which means they have to pay their own staff using appropriated public dollars from taxpayers, by the way, to go out and do the field work.
Okay.
This involves a highly technical process called cruising the stand.
Cruising. That sounds like driving down a boulevard with the windows down, but in this context, I imagine it involves lots of hiking boots and mosquito repellent.
And very specialized equipment. Cruising basically means physically walking through the dense forest, often bushwhacking through heavy undergrowth, to estimate the total volume and the specific species of timber available.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. Foresters use tools like clinometers to measure the height of the trees, and they take core samples to determine age and health.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they are statistically sampling the forest to figure out how many board feet of lumber are actually sitting on that mountain.
And they aren't just looking at the trees from a distance and scribbling on a clipboard, right? The sources mention they are physically marking them.
Yes, often literally painting the trunks.
With paint.
Yeah, they use specialized, highly durable paint to mark the specific trees that are allowed to be cut. Or conversely, they might be marking the leave trees.
The leaf trees.
Right, the ones the loggers absolutely must not touch, like perhaps because they provide crucial habitat for a bird species or something.
Okay, so we have federal employees hiking through the woods, painting trees. That alone is a massive labor cost. But then comes the paperwork, which the sources indicate is arguably the most expensive and time-consuming part of this entire pre-sale phase.
Oh, the paperwork is monumental.
How bad is it?
Well, before a single tree can be auctioned, the agency must run complex, highly detailed environmental analyses. This is mandated by foundational environmental laws.
Like NEPA.
Exactly. The National Environmental Policy Act, known as NEPA, and also the National Forest Management Act, or NFMA.
Let's dig into what an environmental analysis actually looks like in practice, because it's not just a quick checklist they fill out on a Friday afternoon.
Not even close.
If they want to log a mountainside, what are they legally required to look for?
Basically, they have to assess the entire ecosystem.
The whole thing.
Yeah. So they bring in wildlife biologists to survey for endangered species. Like perhaps they need to spend weeks just listening for the calls of the northern spotted owl.
Right.
Then they bring in hydrologists.
Hydrologists for a timber sale.
Yes, to model how removing the tree canopy will impact soil runoff and water temperatures in nearby streams.
Oh, because the shade is gone. That makes sense.
Exactly. And they bring in archaeologists, too.
Wait, really? Archaeologists?
Yeah, they have to scour the ground for Native American artifacts or historic pioneer settlements before any heavy equipment comes in.
Just to pause here, because this is the crux of the financial disconnect we're talking about. Every single thing you just described requires highly specialized advanced degree professionals.
Yeah.
You've got biologists, hydrologists, surveyors, archaeologists. They are spending months, maybe years, studying a few hundred acres of woods.
And getting paid federal salaries the whole time.
Right. The cost of all of this labor, the pension benefits, the equipment, the time, it is entirely front-loaded onto the public ledger.
Every penny.
The taxpayer is footing the bill for a staggering amount of prep work before the government has collected a single cent of revenue.
That's the reality. The agency is carrying all the risk and all the upfront capital costs.
Yeah.
And then, after the environmental impact statements are published, which often run into the hundreds or thousands of pages,
Good grief.
and after the public has had a chance to comment and potentially litigate, the agency finally have to officially appraise the timber's financial value.
So they finally set a minimum bid for the auction.
Right.
But wait, we haven't even gotten to the most expensive part yet, have we?
No, we really haven't.
Because all of that was just the pregame. The sources point out that the real financial black hole of a timber sale is the access problem.
Ah, yes. The access problem is where the economics truly begin to unravel.
Tell me about it.
You see, The United States has been logging its forests for a very, very long time.
Since the beginning, practically.
Exactly. So the easiest, most accessible flat ground trees located near existing highways, those were cut a century ago.
The low-hanging fruit is gone, literally.
Quite literally. Today, the timber left in our national forests is very often located on incredibly steep, deeply remote, or completely roadless terrain.
Right, way back in the mountains.
And you cannot just hike in and carry a multi-ton Douglas fir out on your shoulder.
As much as the lumberjacks might want to try.
Right. To get private, heavy logging equipment, I'm talking feller bunchers, skidders, massive logging trucks into the site, and to haul the logs out, you have to build a road.
A real road.
A heavy-duty, industrial-grade mountain road.
And building a road into a steep mountainside isn't just laying down some gravel in a line.
Oh, no.
You are blasting solid rock. You are carving these massive cut-and-fill slopes into the hillside. You are installing giant steel culverts to route streams under the roadbed. I mean, it is a major civil engineering project.
It absolutely is.
So how does the government pay for this? Because historically, they don't just write a check to a construction company, do they?
No. Historically, and actually still commonly today, the Forest Service relies on a very unique accounting mechanism.
Okay.
While they sometimes plan and pay for the road directly, the dominant model we need to look at involves the private timber purchaser.
The logging company itself?
Right. The government basically says to the logging company, we will let you build the road to access the trees, and in exchange, we will grant you what are called purchaser road credits.
Purchaser road credits. Okay, let me make sure I understand the mechanics of this credit.
Go for it.
Let's say I'm the logging company. I win the bid for the timber.
Okay.
I bring in my bulldozers. I blast that rock. I install the culverts. And I build a 2-mile road up the mountain.
Yep.
I tally up my receipts. And let's say it cost me $200,000 to build that road.
Okay.
What happens to that $200,000?
You take that $200,000 cost and you apply it as a direct credit against what you owe the federal government for the trees you're about to cut down.
Wait, really?
You literally reduce your cash payment to the Treasury by the exact cost of the road you just built.
That is wild. I was trying to think of a way to explain this that makes sense in our everyday lives.
It's tough.
It's like, okay, it's like I hire a contractor to pave a massive mile-long driveway up to my house. And I also pay them to survey my property line and appraise a vintage car I have sitting in the garage.
Okay, I see where you're going.
And then, after all that work, I sell them the vintage car for less than the cost of the driveway they just paved.
Yep, that's the math.
As a homeowner, I'd be taking a massive loss. Why would anyone logically agree to this deal?
Well, your homeowner analogy captures the absurdity perfectly. But, we have to look at it from the government's perspective.
Which is what?
The Forest Service would counter your analogy by saying, yes, we took a loss on the car, but look at this magnificent driveway we now own.
Ah, right. The infrastructure.
Exactly. They'd say, we can use it to reach the back of the property, the neighbors can use it to go hiking, sire trucks can use it. They view the road as valuable, permanent public infrastructure.
But the reality of the auction process is where that defense gets really muddy, doesn't it?
Really does.
Because the cost of building a mountain road is fixed, and it is massive. You can't negotiate with gravity or solid granite.
No, you can't.
But the market price for timber, that fluctuates wildly based on housing starts, global supply chains, interest rates.
The road costs are a fixed anchor, while the timber revenue is essentially a kite blowing in the wind.
That's a great way to put it.
If you are auctioning off trees in a deeply remote area, or perhaps it's a stand of small, lower-value tree species like lodgepole pine rather than premium Douglas fir, the math gets bleak very quickly.
Because the bid is so low.
Exactly. The cash brought in by the winning bid frequently doesn't even cover the agency's initial preparation costs.
The biologists, the cruisers, the paint.
Exactly. Let alone the massive fixed cost of the road.
So just to recap this insane cycle, the logging company builds the road, uses their credits to essentially wipe out their bill for the trees, cuts down the timber, and takes it to the mill to sell at a profit.
Yep.
The local mill gets the logs to process and keep their workers employed. The private sector walks away whole or even profitable.
Yeah.
But the massive administrative preparation costs and the multi-$100,000 infrastructure costs stay firmly planted on the public ledger.
That is the exact definition of a below-cost timber sale. As one of our sources so elegantly phrases it, the externality is made administrative.
The externality is made administrative.
Wow. The cost is socialized, while the extracted resource is privatized.
It is almost brilliant in its bureaucratic invisibility.
It really is.
Because if the government were just handing over a giant novelty-sized check for $1 million to a logging CEO on the evening news, there would be public outrage.
Obviously, it would look like a blatant direct subsidy.
But because it's buried in purchaser road credits and agency labor hours, it just looks like routine paperwork. You don't see the money moving.
You don't see the money, no.
Yeah.
But you absolutely see the physical aftermath.
The roads.
Because eventually, the logging stops. The trees are cut, the feller bunchers are loaded onto flatbeds, the log trucks roll out, and the gates are locked.
But the mountain has been fundamentally altered.
Right. The roads do not vanish.
Which brings us to the physical reality of what we've built. We touched on the 370,000 miles earlier, but I want to really dive into what that actually means for the landscape today.
Let's do it.
Because a dirt road carved into a steep mountainside is not a build-it-and-forget-it piece of infrastructure.
Far from it. These roads were engineered and built primarily for one highly specific, temporary purpose.
Moving logs.
Right, to bear the immense weight of log trucks hauling multi-ton loads out of temporary work sites. They were built for industrial extraction.
Okay.
But today, the vast majority of the traffic on these national forest roads has nothing to do with logging.
Oh, it's public recreation.
Exactly.
It's hunters and pickup trucks, families pulling pop-up campers, hikers looking for a remote trailhead, people riding ATVs on the weekend.
And that shift in usage creates a massive problem.
Why? Because it's too much traffic.
Well, a road designed for 5-year logging operation is now being used as a permanent public thoroughfare for decades. And to survive the elements, a mountain gravel road requires intense, constant maintenance.
Right. Mother Nature wants her mountain back.
Exactly. You have harsh freeze-thaw cycles that crack the surface. You have heavy spring rains that carve deep ruts.
The washboarding.
Yeah. You have tree root systems constantly trying to reclaim the roadbed. And most importantly, you have culverts.
The metal pipes under the road.
Right. The pipes buried under the road to let streams flow through. Those rust out and they collapse.
I think anyone who has ever tried to drive a normal sedan to a hiking trail knows exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, it's brutal.
You hit those teeth-rattling washboards, you dodge potholes the size of bathtubs, you just, pray you don't pop a tire on a sharp rock.
It's an adventure.
The roads are falling apart, and the sources put a terrifying price tag on this decay.
They do. The deferred maintenance backlog for the Forest Service road system is staggering. We are looking at a system that is actively crumbling because it is fundamentally unfunded.
Let's give the listener the specific numbers from the reports. The deferred maintenance, meaning the repairs they absolutely need to do but have put off because they just don't have the money, is estimated in the multi-billion-dollar range.
Multi-billion.
The sources provide a range depending on how you categorize the assets. It's over $3 billion just for the critical roads, bridges, and trails themselves.
Right.
And when you look at the agency-wide maintenance backlog, including facilities, it shoots over $5 billion.
And it's important to note that many third-party watchdogs and environmental engineers estimate the real number is actually much, much higher than that.
Unbelievable.
The annual budget the agency receives from Congress, specifically to maintain these roads, falls laughably short.
It's just a drop in the bucket.
It isn't enough to fix the backlog,
Yeah.
and it often isn't even enough to hold the system steady and prevent further degradation.
So we have a $3 to $5 billion liability just sitting out in the woods. This is the ultimate socialized cost. We allowed private companies to carve up the mountains to get their timber, and in exchange, the public inherited a 370,000-mile crumbling infrastructure network that we literally cannot afford to maintain.
But, the cost of a crumbling mountain road isn't just an inconvenience for a camper with a flat tire.
Right, there's a biological cost.
A massive one. The financial backlog masks a much more severe, externalized ecological toll.
Let's get into that.
Because when a road fails, it doesn't just quietly disappear into the brush, it falls apart destructively. We need to talk about sediment, and we need to talk about salmon.
Let's dive into that, because if you ask the average person what the biggest environmental impact of logging is, they will naturally say, cutting down the trees.
Sure, they picture clear cuts and stumps.
Exactly. But biologically speaking, the sources emphasize that the roads are often the most damaging and longest-lasting element.
That is a critical paradigm shift in how we understand forestry. Roads are universally recognized as the single largest source of sediment resulting from forestry operations.
I want to make sure the listener understands the mechanics here, because when we say sediment, We aren't talking about a little bit of dust blowing in the wind on a dry summer day.
No, no.
How does a road actually damage a river?
We are talking about thousands of tons of raw earth.
Wow.
Think about how a mountain road is built. You have to cut a flat shelf into a steep slope.
Right?
That leaves a massive wall of exposed raw dirt and gravel above the road, and loose fill dirt pushed over the edge below the road.
Like a scar on the hill.
Exactly. Now, if that road is actively maintained, graders smooth it out, and engineers keep the drainage ditches clear so rainwater is safely routed away.
But we just established they have a multi-billion-dollar maintenance backlog, so they aren't maintaining them.
Precisely. If a road is abandoned or neglected, the drainage systems fail.
Okay.
A metal culvert under the road rusts through and collapses, and the next time there's a heavy rainstorm, the water doesn't flow under the road.
Where does it go?
It backs up, it pools, and eventually it washes out the entire roadbed. Massive cascades of muddy water, carrying tons of exposed dirt, gravel, and silt, wash directly down the slopes and plunge into the streams and rivers below.
And for aquatic life, particularly anadromous fish like salmon, that sudden influx of dirt is a death sentence.
It is. It alters the fundamental architecture of the river.
How so?
Well, salmon require incredibly specific, highly sensitive environments to spawn successfully. They spend years in the ocean and then fight their way miles upriver to lay their eggs.
The famous salmon run.
Exactly. And they don't just lay them anywhere. They need cold, fast-moving water flowing over clean, loose gravel beds.
I've seen documentaries on this. The female salmon turns on her side and uses her tail to violently dig a nest called a redd right into the gravel.
Exactly. She lays her eggs in the gravel, the male fertilizes them, and she covers them back up.
Okay.
Now, the crucial biological mechanism here is oxygen.
Because they're buried under rocks.
Right.
Yeah.
The developing salmon embryos are buried under rocks. They survive because the clean, loose gravel has thousands of tiny gaps, interstitial spaces.
Oh, so the water flows through the rocks.
Yes. The fast-moving river water flows continuously through these gaps, delivering life-saving oxygen to the eggs and flushing away metabolic waste.
So what happens when a failed logging road, 2 miles uphill, dumps a landslide of fine sediment into that stream?
It's devastating. That fine dirt and silt washes over the spawning beds and acts almost like wet concrete.
Oh, wow. Wet concrete.
Yeah. It settles to the bottom
Hmm.
and completely fills in all those tiny gaps between the gravel. It essentially seals the riverbed.
So the water can't flow through.
The water can no longer flow through the rocks, the eggs are physically smothered, their oxygen supply is entirely cut off, and they suffocate before they can ever hatch.
It is a devastating, invisible chain reaction.
It truly is.
And beyond just suffocating the eggs, the sediment alters the physical shape of the riverbed too, right?
It does. It makes the pools shallower, which means the water gets warmer in the summer sun.
And salmon need cold water.
Very cold water. They are incredibly sensitive to water temperature spikes, so the sediment fragments their entire habitat.
And here is the truly tragic part of the timeline, looking at the sources. The timber sale that funded that road might have happened in 1975.
Oh, easily.
The trees were cut, the mill processed the wood, the economy moved on. But 50 years later, because the road was left behind and unmaintained, it is still slowly bleeding dirt into a salmon stream, actively depressing fish populations half a century after the logging ended.
That's exactly right. A timber sale is a snapshot in time, but the road is a permanent geological event.
A permanent geological event. And I want to clarify for our listeners, our sources detail this physical mechanism without diving into the larger, incredibly heated political debates about old-growth logging
Right.
or specific battlegrounds like the Tongass National Forest in Alaska. Those are entirely different, massive topics.
Which we could do a whole other deep dive on.
We really could, but right now we are focusing strictly on the universal physics of a dirt road on a steep hill.
Because the physics don't care about politics. Gravity and water will always pull an unmaintained dirt road down into the nearest river.
Okay, so if the physical reality is this disaster, if we have millions of tons of dirt suffocating salmon and a $3 to $5 billion deferred maintenance backlog, the financial ledger must be an absolute bloodbath.
It depends on which ledger you're looking at.
Right. How do the accountants and the auditors look at this and not immediately pull the fire alarm? Let's talk about the clash of financial methodologies, because the sources show two different groups looking at the exact same forest and coming up with wildly different math.
It is one of the most fascinating bureaucratic disputes in modern government.
Lay it out for us.
Let's start with the watchdog ledger. These are the folks who are strictly counting the cold, hard cash.
The bean counters.
Exactly. When external independent auditors look at the books, they see exactly what you'd expect. Massive, undeniable cash losses.
Give me the numbers. What did the government's own auditors find?
Well, the gold standard for this kind of audit is the Government Accountability Office, the GAO.
They're Congress's nonpartisan watchdog.
Right, their independent investigative arm. In the late 1990s, they decided to look closely at the books of the timber program. They examined a specific 3-year window, fiscal years 1992 through 1994.
And what was the verdict for those 3 years?
The GAO found that the Forest Service timber program fell short of covering its own costs by roughly $1 billion.
Wait, $1 billion?
$1 billion in cash losses in just 36 months. And if you extrapolate their findings across the entire decade of the 1990s, cumulative losses hit somewhere between $1 billion and $2 billion.
A billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money, as the saying goes.
Exactly.
Did they specify where that money was bleeding out?
Crucially, yes. They noted that hundreds of millions of those lost dollars were specifically tied to the costs of engineering, preparing, and crediting those timber roads we just discussed.
So the infrastructure was eating the revenue alive.
Completely devouring it.
Now, I know someone listening is thinking, okay, but that was the 1990s. Surely we've modernized our accounting or stopped doing this in the last 30 years.
You would think so.
But the sources highlight much more recent estimates that suggest the problem has only metastasized.
It has. Now we have to move from government audits to NGO estimates for the modern numbers.
Yeah? Huh.
But they are staggering.
Okay, let's hear them.
The Center for Sustainable Economy, or CSE, which is a think tank whose data is heavily referenced by prominent fiscal watchdogs like Taxpayers for Common Sense, they ran the numbers for the modern era.
What years did they look at?
Looking at a 5-year window from fiscal year 2013 through 2017, they estimated the program lost between $1.6 and $1.8 billion.
Wait, $1.8 billion total over 5 years?
No, $1.6 to $1.8 billion a year. Annually.
A year?
Annually, yes. Across both U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management lands.
Almost $2 billion a year in negative cash flow.
That's the estimate.
If I am an auditor, I am barricading the doors and changing the locks on the agency headquarters. But let's apply some critical friction here. Are those numbers universally accepted?
No, we must be very careful to add some crucial nuance here.
Okay.
Those recent numbers from CSE are NGO estimates based on their specific methodology. They are not official stamped government audit findings like the old GAO numbers.
So the agency pushes back?
Oh, absolutely. The agency disputes how CSE categorizes certain overhead costs.
But the CSC would probably argue they're actually undercounting the true cost, right?
Oh.
Because they are only looking at spreadsheets and receipts.
Exactly their argument. CSE explicitly points out that their $1.8 billion annual figure is highly conservative.
Because they ignore the environmental damage.
Yes, because they are strictly looking at financial deficits on paper. They are completely excluding the unpriced environmental damages we just spent 10 minutes talking about.
Like the salmon.
Right. If a poorly built logging road destroys a salmon spawning ground, and that results in a commercial fishing fleet catching 50,000 fewer salmon over the next decade, that is a massive hit to the regional economy.
But that economic damage doesn't show up on the Forest Service timber ledger.
Not at all.
So the fiscal watchdogs are looking at this and saying, this is a multi-billion-dollar boondoggle. We are bleeding taxpayer cash to subsidize private timber companies and destroying rivers in the process.
That's the watchdog view.
But the Forest Service doesn't just hang their heads, shrug, and say, yeah, you caught us.
No, they do not.
They have a very robust, historically entrenched, legally grounded defense.
They absolutely do. And if we want to understand this issue, we have to understand their defense.
Let's hear it.
The Forest Service's answer to the watchdogs is essentially, you are measuring the wrong thing. You are trying to grade us on a calculus test, but we were assigned to write a history essay.
I love that.
It's accurate to how they feel.
Let me play devil's advocate for the agency. If the Forest Service isn't a private corporate business, they probably aren't legally required to turn a profit, right? They are a public service, like the post office or a public school. So are they claiming the financial losses are just the acceptable cost of doing public business?
That is the core of their argument, and it is baked into federal law. It all goes back to the year 1960 and a landmark piece of legislation called the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act.
The Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act. Okay.
This law fundamentally dictates how the agency operates, and it explicitly states that the Forest Service is not directed to run the national forests as a for-profit timber plantation.
So what are they supposed to run it as?
A multi-purpose resource. Yep. Under the 1960 law, timber extraction is legally just one co-equal use, standing right alongside outdoor recreation, watershed protection, livestock range, and wildlife habitat.
So they have to balance all of those.
Exactly. The statute explicitly relieves the agency of any legal duty to maximize dollar returns from any single use.
Wait, so under the letter of the law, if the agency runs a timber sale that loses $2 million in cold, hard cash, but that sale achieves other environmental or social goals, the agency considers it a successful, legally compliant sale.
Precisely. The Forest Service argues that a timber sale can be economically sensible and highly valuable to the American public without returning a single cent of pure cash profit to the Treasury.
Because they view it differently.
They view the timber sale not as a retail transaction, but as a management tool.
Okay, let's test that theory. Give me a concrete example of what a non-cash public benefit actually looks like in reality.
Sure.
Because to a skeptic, it sounds like corporate jargon for losing money.
Fair enough. Let's look at the most pressing issue in Western forests today. Hazardous wildfire fuels.
A huge issue.
Massive. After a century of government policy that aggressively put out every single forest fire, many Western forests are unnaturally choked with small, spindly trees and dense dead brush.
They are absolute tinderboxes waiting for a lightning strike.
Exactly. We see the catastrophic results on the news every summer.
Whole skylines turn orange. Entire towns wiped out.
So the Forest Service might design a timber sale specifically to thin out those small trees and reduce that explosive fuel load.
Okay, proactive management.
They want to restore the forest to a more natural, fire-resilient state. Now, from a market perspective, small, spindly trees don't fetch a high price at the lumber mill.
You can't make a nice dining room table out of them.
No, you can't. The auction receipts for that low-value wood won't come close to covering the agency's cost of preparing the sale or building the access road.
It's guaranteed to be a below-cost sale on paper.
Exactly. But think about the alternative.
If they don't do it.
If thinning that forest prevents a catastrophic high-intensity crown fire from sweeping through that valley, a fire that would have cost the federal government $50 million to fight with helicopters and hotshot crews.
Wow.
A fire that would have burned down a nearby mountain town, destroyed the local watershed, and pumped millions of tons of carbon into the atmosphere. Isn't that money-losing timber sale actually a massive economic success?
That is a phenomenal point, and it totally shifts the perspective.
It changes the whole math.
It reminds me of how we view other foundational public services. Judging a national forest solely by the cash it generates at a timber auction is like judging a public library's success solely by the late fees it collects.
That's a great analogy.
You're looking at a tiny revenue stream and completely ignoring the immense societal value of a literate populace.
Exactly.
If you ask an economist, how do you put a hard dollar price on preventing a catastrophic wildfire from destroying a town's drinking water supply?
Cool.
It's almost impossible to calculate, but we all intuitively know the value is immense.
The analogy holds up, but here is where the watchdogs push back.
Oh, they don't buy it.
Well, it raises a maddening question. How do you actually put the prevention of a negative event on a spreadsheet?
Right. How do you account for something that didn't happen?
The Forest Service can claim they are altering the species mix to improve forest health, or that the logging road they just heavily subsidize will eventually open up deep forest access for thousands of campers, generating local tourism revenue.
Right. They can claim the road is a feature, not a bug.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are real, tangible benefits, but they're incredibly soft theoretical numbers compared to the hard, audited reality of $1 billion cash deficit.
It's much easier to count missing dollars.
It is. The watchdogs argue that the agency uses unpriced benefits as a convenient, unprovable smokescreen to justify giving cheap timber to private industry.
Which brings us to a really perplexing part of this story.
Okay.
If the accounting is this subjective and messy, and the road network is crumbling into the rivers, and the fiscal watchdogs are constantly screaming about billion-dollar boondoggles, why doesn't Congress just end it?
That is the big question.
Why is there such immense bipartisan political pressure to just keep the chainsaws running and the below-cost sales flowing? If a program is this controversial, usually politicians abandon it.
Usually, yes. But to understand the political gravity of this program, we have to step entirely out of the spreadsheet and look at the human element.
The people who live there.
Right. We have to go back even further than the 1960 Multiple Use Act. We have to go back to the end of World War II. We have to go to 1944.
1944, the war is wrapping up, soldiers are coming home, the post-war housing boom is about to explode.
Exactly. The country needed wood, and it needed it fast. In 1944, Congress passed the Sustained Yield Forest Management Act.
What did that do?
Well, this wasn't just a law about how many trees to cut. It was a profound, intentional piece of social and economic engineering.
How so?
This act explicitly tied the harvesting of federal national forest timber to the economic stability of local rural communities.
Oh, wow.
The government essentially created a social contract with the American West.
Meaning, the government was promising these remote towns a guaranteed steady supply of wood from public lands.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Entire mill towns all across states like Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana were practically willed into existence by this policy.
Because of the promised timber.
Yes. They were built around the promise of a reliable, continuous federal cut. The government essentially said to the timber companies and the workers, build your multi-million-dollar sawmills here. Build your homes here. Lay down your roots in these remote valleys, and we will ensure a steady flow of public timber to keep your economy running in perpetuity.
So the dependency wasn't an accident.
Not at all.
It wasn't just capitalism finding a resource and exploiting it. It was a deliberate federal policy to populate the rural West.
It was entirely by design. So fast forward to today.
Okay.
When a fiscal watchdog in Washington, D.C. looks at a ledger and says, this specific timber sale in the Idaho Panhandle is projected to lose $500,000. We should cancel it. The local community doesn't hear a debate about fiscal efficiency.
What do they hear?
They hear, the federal government is going to pull the floor out from under our town and violate an 80-year-old promise.
I can see why that is a political third rail.
It's explosive.
Because if the mill closes because the federal timber dries up, the mill workers lose their jobs. Right.
But it doesn't stop there. The diner across the street closes because no one is buying lunch. The local hardware store goes bankrupt. The tax base of the entire town evaporates.
That is the reality of rural dependency. It is a devastating, cascading social cost.
Yeah.
And you will not find the foreclosure of a local hardware store anywhere on a GAO audit ledger.
No, you won't.
The human cost of stopping the timber program is immense, and politicians representing those states fight tooth and nail to keep the cut going, regardless of what the cash accountants say.
And digging into the sources, it goes even deeper than just the private jobs at the mill and the diner.
It does.
There is a direct legislated pipeline between public timber extraction and local government funding. This blew my mind when I read it. Let's talk about the 25% rule.
Yes. This is a crucial, often overlooked piece of the puzzle that explains why local governments fight so hard for timber sales.
Walk us through it.
So federal land cannot be taxed by local counties.
Right. The county can't tax the federal government. Exactly. If the Forest Service owns 70% of the land in a county, that county has a tiny property tax base to fund its services.
Because 70% of their land is untouchable.
Right. To make up for this, for a very long time, there was a rule that the Forest Service had to share 25% of its gross timber receipts directly with the local counties where the national forests were located.
25% of the gross revenue.
Right. And what was that money legally required to be spent on?
I know from the sources, but say it for the listener.
It was specifically earmarked by law to fund rural roads and local public schools.
Let that sink in. The federal timber program was literally funding the education of the kids in these rural counties.
It was.
When a logger cut down a tree, a quarter of the revenue went to buying school books and paving the road to the high school.
Literally. Timber dollars underwrote the most fundamental, essential rural public services for generations.
That is incredible.
Now, let's look at the timeline. As the environmental movements of the 1980s and 90s took hold, driven by concerns over endangered species like the spotted owl, and the realization of the ecological damage from things like road sediment,
Right.
timber harvests on public lands dropped dramatically. The cut plummeted.
And if the cut plummets, the revenues plummet, which means the 25% check to the counties evaporates.
Suddenly, rural counties were facing an existential crisis.
Because their school budgets just disappeared.
Yes. They couldn't run snowplows to keep their roads open, they had to lay off sheriff's deputies, and they couldn't pay their teachers. Some counties were looking at shutting down their school districts entirely to a 4-day week.
So what happened? Did the federal government just let the schools collapse?
No, The political pressure was too immense. Congress had to step in and create a massive bailout program.
Okay.
They passed something called the Secure Rural Schools and Community Self-Determination Act.
Quite a name.
Yeah. This program essentially printed federal money to artificially backfill the financial gap left by the missing timber revenue. It decoupled school funding from the physical cutting of trees.
But the psychological and historical legacy remains, right?
Please so.
When you understand that for half a century, timber sales historically paid for the local elementary school, it deeply complicates the watchdog narrative.
It really does.
It's really hard to look a rural county commissioner in the eye and say the below-cost timber program is just pure waste or corporate welfare.
It is an incredibly tangled web of ecological damage, financial losses, and deep social engineering.
But surely the federal government, with all its massive resources, its armies of economists and data scientists, tried to create a system to actually measure all this, right?
I hope so.
To put the cold, hard cash losses on one side of the ledger and the estimated value of the schools, the jobs, the recreation access, and the fire prevention on the other to see if it all balances out. We can't just be flying blind.
They absolutely did try. As the criticism of below-cost sales reached a fever pitch in the 1980s, Congress demanded transparency.
And what did they do?
They directed the Forest Service to create exactly that kind of comprehensive, holistic accounting system. It was a massive undertaking called the Timber Sale Program Information Reporting System. We'll call it TSPRS.
TSPRS. Okay, so what exactly was TSPR supposed to do? How do you build a spreadsheet for this?
Well, TSPRS was designed to be the ultimate truth teller. It was mandated to track and measure both the financial cash flow, the hard dollars and cents, and the broader economic non-cash benefits.
The unpriced stuff.
Right. And it was supposed to do this forest by forest, sale by sale. It intended to put a dollar value on things like a recreation visitor day generated by a new logging road, or the estimated economic value of preventing a fire.
That sounds incredibly ambitious.
It was. It was supposed to be the great equalizer in this entire debate.
Was supposed to be. I hear the past tense there. Did it work? Did it prove the program was a net benefit to society?
That is the great mystery, and it is a critical turning point in this whole saga.
What happened?
The Forest Service spent years developing TSPIRs. They published reports for a while, and then they quietly stopped.
Wait, what?
The agency ceased publishing its TSPIR reports after fiscal year 1998.
Wait, they just stopped. A massive congressionally mandated accounting system designed to justify their most controversial program, and they just unplugged it. Why?
Well, that depends entirely on who you ask in Washington.
What's the official story?
The agency's official stance suggested that the TSPR system was simply too cumbersome, too incredibly expensive to maintain the data collection, and perhaps didn't accurately reflect their rapidly shifting ecosystem management goals as they moved away from pure extraction.
Let me put on my conspiracy theorist hat for a second.
Go ahead.
That sounds like a very polite way of saying the numbers look terrible. Critics must have had a field day with that explanation.
Oh, the critics absolutely pounced. Environmental groups and fiscal conservatives alike argue to this day that the agency stopped publishing the numbers because the math simply no longer worked.
The cash losses were too big.
The cash losses were too massive, and the attempts to put a dollar value on unpriced benefits looked too flimsy to mathematically justify the physical destruction of the program anymore.
So they just hid the math.
So they argue the agency buried the thermometer so they wouldn't have to read the temperature.
Think about what that means for the debate. If we connect this to the bigger picture, without TSPRS, without an official government-run reconciliation of both the cash and the non-cash benefits, there is no neutral arbiter left in the room.
There is no official scorecard.
Wow.
Exactly. You're left with two sides entirely shouting past each other in the dark. The watchdogs and critics are forced to only count the cold, hard cash because that is the only empirical data left available to them.
So they look at the receipts and scream about billions of taxpayer dollars lost to corporate subsidies.
Right. Meanwhile, the agency continues to point to its 1960 mandate and claims immense unpriced benefits: fire reduction, recreation, community stability, but they provide no unified, verifiable math to actually prove to the public that those benefits outweigh the financial and ecological costs.
It's a debate that can never be resolved because they aren't even speaking the same language anymore.
Exactly.
Which brings us directly to the present day. We are sitting here analyzing this deep dive in June of 2026. This is not just a historical oddity from the 90s.
Far from it.
This is an active, incredibly heated policy debate happening right outside our windows in the national forests today.
It is more relevant now than it has been in decades because right now, as we speak, there is a renewed, aggressive administration push to significantly expand national forest timber output.
The 2025-2026 expansion push.
That's the one.
Let's extrapolate on this. If the administration wants to dramatically increase the volume of timber coming off public lands today, what are the long-term consequences? Knowing everything we've just discussed about the mechanics of how this works, what happens when you hit the gas pedal?
Well, the watchdogs and environmental scientists are absolutely sounding the alarm.
I bet.
Because of everything we've discussed, if you expand the cut, you inevitably expand the footprint. Remember, the ED trees are gone.
To get more volume, you have to go further into the backcountry.
Exactly. That means subsidizing more roads into previously roadless, pristine areas.
Which means adding hundreds, maybe thousands of new miles of road to a 370,000-mile road system that the agency already admits has a multi-billion-dollar deferred maintenance backlog.
It is the definition of adding a new, expensive wing to a house when the roof is already caving in and the foundation is crumbling.
It makes no sense physically.
They can't maintain what they have, but the push for more timber requires building more infrastructure.
And as those new roads are built and inevitably fall behind on maintenance, the sediment keeps pouring into the rivers and the salmon habitats continue to choke. It's expanding the ecological liability.
That is the critical view, yes. But on the flip side, we have to look at the modern defense.
What are they saying now?
The agency and the timber industry are leaning incredibly heavily into the dual arguments we explored earlier, but with a new, urgent modern context.
Okay.
They are pointing to rural jobs, which are always a potent political force, especially in economically depressed areas. But even more powerfully today, they are pointing to climate change and catastrophic wildfire.
Right, because the fire seasons are undeniably getting worse.
Yeah.
Every year sets a new record for acres burned.
They are longer, hotter, and more destructive. And the agency argues that we absolutely must get into these dense, overgrown forests to thin them out and reduce the hazardous fuel loads before they incinerate.
And they use the timber sales to do it.
Right. And they argue that selling that removed material as commercial timber, even at a massive cash loss, is the only economically feasible way to accomplish that thinning at the massive scale required.
Their argument is essentially, if we don't log it, it will burn. And if it burns, the ecological and economic damage will be 100 times worse than the cost of a logging road.
That is their core existential argument for the modern era.
So what does this all mean? We have laid out the step-by-step mechanics of a timber sale, the 1944 history of rural mill towns, the biological tragedy of sediment in salmon streams, and the intractable billion-dollar math dispute between the watchdogs and the agency.
We've covered a lot of ground.
And it seems we are left with a fundamental, totally unresolved tension.
That unresolved tension is the heart of the issue.
Yeah.
We have a massive federal agency that is legally directed by Congress to sell timber and manage multiple uses. It is structurally set up through the immense upfront costs of environmental preparation and mountain road building to lose massive amounts of cash doing it.
And as a physical result of that century-long process, it is sitting on a sprawling empire of gravel roads it absolutely cannot afford to keep up.
Exactly.
I think the biggest takeaway for you, the listener, is a shift in perspective.
Definitely.
Every time you hear a news story or read an article about a new timber sale being proposed on public lands, you have to realize you are not just hearing about trees being cut down.
No, you're not.
You are actually hearing about a massive, complex, publicly underwritten infrastructure project.
To summarize the journey we've taken today, a timber sale starts with a taxpayer-funded cruise through the dense woods by specialized biologists and foresters.
Then it turns into a heavily subsidized road blasted into a steep mountainside.
Right. And it ends in a permanent gravel liability that, if neglected, sheds tons of sediment into salmon streams for decades to come.
And all of it is justified legally and politically by a deeply complex web of multiple use laws, escalating wildfire fears, and the very real human economic needs of rural communities.
It is a dizzying, deeply entrenched system.
It leaves us with a lot to chew on.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive.
Lay it on us.
Let's assume for a moment that the Forest Service is entirely right in their philosophy. Let's fully accept the premise that our national forests shouldn't be run like a ruthless for-profit business, but rather as a provider of broader, unpriced public goods.
Okay, I'm with you. Let's say the cash losses are totally justified by the public access and the fire prevention.
If we accept that premise, at what point does the physical cost of providing that access, the sprawling, crumbling 370,000 miles of neglected roads themselves, become the very thing destroying the fragile ecosystem we are paying so much money to manage and protect?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? The driveway ruins the house.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you're out hiking, or you pop a tire driving up a washboard mountain pass, or you just look up at a forested peak, I hope you think a little differently about the hidden, incredibly expensive, and deeply controversial roads that run right through it. Until next time.